Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. When I asked you to guess what the topic would be in the next episode, many of you mentioned emotional swings. That's why I decided to make this video for you, since I see that this topic interests you. Let's try to dive deeper and figure it out together. Remember, I mentioned that there are tactical videos that analyze a small piece, an element of our inner world, and there are strategic ones. This video is a strategic one, and together, like commanders leaning over a map, we'll try to understand what is happening as a whole. When we talk about significant emotional swings, we deeply understand that there is extreme euphoria and there is profound drama. In other words, here it feels terrible and here it feels terrific. And there is a certain balanced area where we are more or less in a stable equilibrium. Many people perceive balance as a kind of numbness. We will talk about this a little later. But there is a calm equilibrium where you feel emotions, a bit more sadness, a bit more euphoria. But you understand that you are in touch with reality, with your own body. And these emotions do not overwhelm you. For someone who is not very familiar with their own intricate inner world, it can be quite profoundly difficult to accurately recognize the subtle initial shift towards significant drama, a noticeable decline, deep depression, or the exciting onset of a powerful rise into exhilarating euphoria. Unfortunately, we are not taught in school that we experience emotional fluctuations and that we generate these emotions within ourselves. So the first step we need to take is to learn to sense emotional changes with subtlety. That is, not when we are already swept away by a wave and carried off, but when the emotion is just beginning to build. I have drawn this illustration for you to help with understanding. This previous drawing shows us movement through space. And this one depicts the same process, but from a slightly different perspective. Here, what we are looking at is the emotional charge of euphoria. So somewhere here in the middle, we have an approximate norm where emotions do not overwhelm us, do not destroy us, and do not carry us away. We have the ability to choose. In other words, we are more than our emotions. But at a certain point, as this emotion intensifies, it begins to rule over us. That is, we become subject to it, and it is no longer possible to influence the process. When we talk about a personality that is closed in on itself, a person who denies objectivity, denies reality, and claims that whatever is inside them is the only reality, then such a person has no boundaries. There is nothing that can stop them. And then emotions can escalate endlessly, spiraling out of control. In other words, the more closed off and isolated a person's inner world becomes, the more they tend to feel like an absolute ruler within its confines, dictating every aspect of their internal experience. Reality becomes what I have defined as reality, not what is actually happening, not the lost keys, but a catastrophe. So if we are at this point, we understand what actions we need to take in order to resolve this problem, the loss of the keys. But if we truly slip into a state of euphoria, thinking, oh well, it genuinely doesn't matter, everything is absolutely fine, then, when it comes to the crucial question of what to do next, we don't get an answer. We are like a cucumber in brine, as if someone is shaking the jar. In other words, we are either inactive on the outside or overflowing with emotions outwardly. But in reality, we are not actually doing anything. The same goes for drama. And when our emotions are at their peak, our subjectivity is also at its highest. These symbols here are meant to indicate the intensity. So the more emotions there are, the greater the subjectivity. Let me remind those who may have just joined that subjectivity is always a personal, individual attitude. That is, something that concerns me directly. And the more my world is disconnected from reality, the greater the subjectivity becomes. Now let's try to understand the intricate reasons why some individuals can so rapidly and intensely become either profoundly angry or incredibly euphoric, and then, with an equally swift transition, find themselves descending into significant emotional drama and interpersonal conflict. This is a factor that truly depends on our genetics. It depends on how excitable, labile, and flexible our nervous system is. Undoubtedly, this is influenced by our genes, in other words, by biology. Our fate also plays a role here, that is, the number of stressful experiences we've gone through. For some, this escalation and subsequent drop will be rapid and intense. For others, it will be slower. But this green zone, the state of being present in reality, in touch with our bodies and connected to the outside world, is something we achieve ourselves. It does not depend on genetics or fate. In other words, establishing contact with reality and creating the ability to objectively analyze what is happening depends on the effort you put in and how much you want to understand what is truly there. Let me give you an example to make this clearer. Before the war began on February 24th, everyone had a different attitude toward it. Some people denied it and said, everything will be fine, everything will be fine, nothing will happen, there will be no war. Others said everything would be terrible, and their fear was so strong that it completely paralyzed them. But there were certain people who, if they didn't understand what might happen themselves, would ask those who had experience in combat, who had lived directly in cities where there was war, and so on. In other words, they created an objective picture of possible developments, and they either left or prepared themselves to face it. Those people who deny everything in an euphoric way, saying everything will be fine, this is not a problem, this can't happen, and so on, when faced with reality, inevitably fall into depression and a state of exhaustion. Those individuals who deliberately frighten themselves do so to such an extreme extent that they ultimately become completely paralyzed by their very own self-generated, overwhelming fear. This particular approach to problem solving will inevitably manifest itself in many diverse aspects of their lives and decision-making processes. In other words, either you realistically assess what is happening and gather facts, or you rely on your emotions and feelings, and then you end up being tossed back and forth on this emotional swing. It's as if you can only think in terms of either everything is good or everything is bad. Either everything is good or everything is bad. And then, a more or less balanced state is achieved not by standing firmly in reality, but through control. That is, by blinding themselves, a person avoids seeing what they don't want to see, what might generate certain emotions within them. They don't see what could upset them. In other words, through blindness, one can keep themselves at this point. At this point, one can also hold themselves there by numbing themselves. This happens when we control and suppress all emotions, feeling nothing at all. So, an artificial equilibrium is created. But because it is artificial, it is quite easy to knock a person out of this state. So if a person hasn't built that green platform we saw in the diagrams, then their only way to maintain balance is through artificial blindness. In other words, the person lives in their own bubble, in a world they've invented for themselves. I recommend that you recreate all these drawings in your own notebook. I hope there are people who understand the importance of taking notes, who realize that much more stays in your memory if you don't just listen to this like a radio show or background noise, but actually draw these diagrams yourself in your notebook. That way, you'll have all these drawings in sequence and you won't even need words anymore. You can simply look at these drawings. It's easier to remember drawings than text. And these drawings will help you form a holistic understanding of the inner world. So at least draw diagrams, even if you don't feel like writing things down. Just fill the page with one diagram after another, rather than continuous text. So ladies and gentlemen, artificial balance is quite unstable and very fragile. It's like a house of cards that can be blown over by even the slightest breeze. At this point of equilibrium, it's easiest for us to maintain it if we stay at home. We don't interact with anyone, we don't engage with the inner or outer world, we don't try to do anything, we have no job, and we have no responsibilities. In other words, this artificiality arises from the lack of contact, and we perceive contact with the outside world as stressful because we don't realize that we immediately start fluctuating. It seems to us that the outside world is putting pressure on us, that it is forcing us to experience these emotions. But in reality, we are simply unable to stay on this small green patch of reality. Let's take another look at this point, at emotional agitation, at emotional swings. When a person loses contact with reality, they immediately find themselves in quicksand, in marshy ground, or in a whirlpool in the water. As always, I'm giving you these associations so that you have a richness of imagery and a deeper understanding. So, quicksand, a whirlpool in a body of water or marshy terrain. In other words, once we lose contact with reality, we no longer control the process. Our emotions begin to intensify. That's why it's so important for us to have someone nearby, someone we can use as an anchor to stop ourselves, even if it's just a cat. We notice that the cat reacts to us in a strange way, and we start to pay attention. How are we behaving? Or it could be someone close to us, because when we're trapped in this closed-off world, we don't even realize what emotional state we're in. But by observing how the world around us reacts, it becomes clear that something is happening to us. Then the question arises, what exactly is it? And it's quite difficult for a person to let go of a world centered around themselves. Remember, there was that illustration of being stuck in a loop within oneself. Many people agree to live with these emotional ups and downs. Even if they feel bad, even if they're falling apart, even if they're slaves to these emotions. But they say, so what? Should I be dead, not alive? And when they say this, they're referring to that illustration. Not this one. They're not talking about this illustration, they're talking about artificially holding on. That is, when there's no understanding of how to be in contact with reality. What does it mean to be in contact with reality? It means honestly seeing yourself, honestly seeing events. But in order to see honestly, we need to be able to withstand the truth. Many people have such a fantastical view of the world and of themselves that they cannot withstand the truth. It destroys them. It's just too much for them. Take a movie, for example, a romantic love story with a happy ending. That's wonderful. But when they start showing real life, how people argue, then make up the ups and downs they go through, they say, oh, this isn't the right kind of life. Here's the fantasy life. When people are confronted with reality, they can't handle it. This ability to withstand reality and face the truth without trying to impose your own version of reality, that is, in this closed world, we are the rulers. We can assign anything, any meaning in our subjectivity, but there is a price to pay for that. In other words, we reign in our subjective world. We can devalue this, call that bad, call something else good, wave a magic wand, and hand out labels to everything. But the price for this is emotional swings. So, when we have, this is what I depicted as that green section you saw in the drawing. We are now going to examine this particular section together. When we develop the ability to withstand reality, it's as if our hearing, our vision, and our thinking all improve. That is because we don't react emotionally to the mismatch between reality and our imagined world, but instead perceive things directly. For example, if there is going to be a war, I don't panic about it and I don't deny it. Instead, I acknowledge it and say, this is happening, I need to prepare for it. And when I stand firmly with both feet in reality, I gain the ability to create more and to receive more information, because many people are blind and deaf precisely because they cannot process it. That is what they hear, they cannot accept, they cannot acknowledge it as truth, and so they push it away, they reject it. That's why blindness and deafness sometimes even manifest on a physiological level, poor eyesight, poor hearing, and so on. I think you all know that feeling, as if you're inside a jar, like you've dived underwater, and everything just doesn't seem to reach you. And this ability to face reality brings many benefits, but it also brings you down to earth. The benefits are that I become smarter, I have many more facts to analyze, and I become more sensitive. For example, I can endure some negative emotions directed at me from a loved one because I remember that I too am not always easy to be around. And it's as if a person's consciousness expands. In other words, the ability to accept reality expands consciousness and reduces these emotional fluctuations. That is, by stepping out of my subjectivity, I stop swinging on these emotional swings. In this way, I create a home for myself. All of us want to have a home where we can come, where things are constant, meaning as predictable and safe as possible. And when a person comes to know themselves, they become that kind of home for themselves, stable, safe, and understandable. I understand what is happening to me. I do not reject myself. I do not get swept away by emotional swings. And in order to create this home, we need to get acquainted with external reality. That is, to learn about something beyond our inner world. And when we develop qualities like objectivity, thoughtfulness, focused observation, the ability to reflect for a long time, to give ourselves time to think things through, not rushing by playing videos at 1.5 or double speed, but approaching things thoughtfully and calmly, we build an analytical foundation. With this, at the very least, we stop being strangers to ourselves, and at best, we stop projecting the cause of our emotional reactions onto the outside world. We realize that it is us. I am the one truly experiencing emotions in response to some external influence, but the emotions are mine. And as soon as I recognize that the emotions are mine, I can manage my own emotional swings. If you found this interesting, please like the video and support the channel with your comments. If you don't feel like writing, just leave a heart. And for those who enjoy writing comments, try adding a description in this green rectangle in this real self. What are you like when you find yourself there? And thanks to this, we will create something together. Other people will come, read the comments, and they have their own puzzle pieces while you have yours. You will share with each other, and each of you will add to the understanding. Many people are already writing on the YouTube channel that the comments here are the smartest and most insightful. I am grateful to my audience, to these intelligent, thoughtful people who write and who are already sharing. And just a reminder, you can explore more on this topic in other videos on the channel. They cover these emotional swings in greater detail and offer practical insights. See you soon.